It's a delight to be here. It's a fantastic conference you've put together, and really enjoyed it last year. So yes, the title is fresh as of yesterday. So hot topic. The idea is that the technology is pretty exciting and pretty dramatic. I don't know if anybody here has been camping without a fire. I did that once. I love camping. And one time we went to a beach in Virginia, on the coast of Virginia, where it was protected. There were wild horses there and so forth. Very nice, except you weren't allowed to build a campfire. Never go camping where you can't build a campfire. It's a completely different experience from the norm. Some of the kids went swimming, and then there's no way to really dry off or warm up. And anyway, disaster. So always be able to build that fire. But the fire is pretty phenomenal when you think about it, being able to, transform raw meat into cooked food and bring light and heat and protection from animals. Must have been quite a development. So analytics isn't quite that transformative, but it still is a fantastic and multi-purpose new thing. And yet it also is a little bit dangerous. There's a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon. Where's Dad? Oh, he's building a fire. He's putting and Calvin gets all excited and runs over there, and then he comes back all disappointed. Oh, in the fireplace. He kind of imagined in the house. So, but it can also be dangerous. So the danger here is partly that it'll be completely rejected, and in a way that is a complete surprise to us techno nerds who only see the beauty and the awesomeness in the technology we're bringing to bear. So I'll tell a little bit of the story. We've been in business 21 years, and so we've learned a few lessons along the way. And one of the big lessons is that technology isn't the biggest risk. The biggest risk is people, and the adaptation, change management, adaptation. So the story is it's very hard to think analytically, and it's even harder to act on the changes required. And our thinking processes are not built for that. We're not built for we're not happy with accepting change, and our sort of primitive brains, if you will, are not really built for the modern world of abundance and relative safety and information deluge and handling of strangers and so forth. So, but we need to overcome these natural weaknesses that we have and not give up, because we're our tribe's best hope by bringing in this thing that can help us compete. And by the way, right now it's an advantage, but as Cronin points out, it's going to be essential. Before long, it's going to be essential for survival in the competitive marketplace. Nobody stays still, our competitors. Now, what's the problem? Well, if you believe that we are, people talk about lizard brains. If you believe that we evolved from extremely small cellular beings, that we have some part of us that's still extremely primitive, that helps explain why our brains. But even if a benevolent and omnipotent creator handcrafted us, there's this problem of original sin, or there's a problem of selfishness, and so forth. So if you have an origin story that starts out very pleasantly like this, or one that where we were earlier life forms, and there's some speculation whatever got us out of the sea. Here's one scientist's hypothesis of how we might have left the ocean, what great moment in evolution it might have been. Either way, of our origins, we have both of them. We spent most of our time not in gleaming metropolises of modernity, but in very small tribes where there really was no such thing as a stranger. Everyone you either knew and were somewhat related to, or they were an enemy, or something very strange. So you had and very little technological change, and very little experience with all sorts of the variety that we have in modern day life. So our brains really probably aren't well suited for the rapidity of things that come at it, and there's a natural resistance to these sorts of things. And not all of this is illogical. Some of it is very good and self-preservation. It's much better to not eat some new strange food and not risk death or whatever than to necessarily to try it out. So it takes, if something new is being presented, it is a hurdle to come across that is fairly large. So one of our ancestors, here's a Far Side cartoon predicting an early data scientist. It's designed a new way to do something. So here's are some ancestors holding pieces of meat over a fire, and then they notice, hey, look what Zog do. And Zog has a new technology, has a stick that is being, is obvious advantages. And there's something we can notice about Zog. It's interesting that glasses, the invention of glasses preceded the use of sticks. That's kind of interesting. One might also notice that Zog dines alone, so, we nerds, we don't ever catch a break, not even our ancestor break. But anyway, so there are obvious advantages to this new technological invention. But, what happens next? Does everyone adopt that, or does Zog get beaten up? So that's the question. How do we have the more positive outcome? Okay, so back to modern day. One of our, you'll hear throughout this conference a lot of great examples of fantastic applications. Just wanted to give one recent one from our own. Sort of, I noticed on my way over here that there was some news articles about some recent oil spills and so forth. We've been very active in lots of different areas, one of which is oil and gas exploration, or in terms of predicting problems, in terms of spills, or in this case, freezing of gas wells. So predicting from daily or hourly or minute temperature and pressure information from various lines, which wells will freeze up or stop producing gas 4 to 6 months from now. So you're listening to information that's occurring every minute, and you're trying to predict information that's going to occur 4 to 6 months from now. By the way, it's a lot easier to predict 2 months from now than it is 4 to 6, but for some reason they needed a lot of lead time, or at least maybe somebody was setting up a problem to fail. But despite that, we were able to succeed and come up with a very good solution, which I'll show in the form of a lift chart. So a lift chart is a way to, as a workshop, we can describe about how to convey results. A lift chart shows you that if you prioritize the wells and put your best examples on the far left, how much production would you save by serving them? You have the capacity with trained staff and equipment and so forth to go out to about 1/5 of the wells. That's the blue line there. So you want to maximize, with that dark red line, how much production you can save by prioritizing the wells. So the best model would put all of the wells with production to the left, if at all possible. And ideally, your red line would go pretty much as straight up as possible and then curve out. A random model would have the 45-degree angle line. So this model is doing extremely well. The lift is 3 times greater from what would be expected by sort of randomly treating wells from what was saved by predicting ahead of time which wells were going to need help and going to them. So hundreds of millions of dollars actual savings available from just not with any new crew, but just scheduling them different, sending them ahead of time to where they're going to be needed, and saving the production that would otherwise be lost. So it's a great example. It doesn't cost anywhere near that, of course, to do the analysis. Unfortunately, it doesn't cost that much. But if you ran thousands of randomized examples to see what chance might have given you, something I call target shuffling, you would get those 95% confidence intervals around there. So the result is extremely significant. So it's just an example of the kinds of savings that are possible by analyzing the data available to you, even though the data doesn't seem at first to be that relevant in terms of the time periods and so forth. There often can be information buried in there. And there was a lot of hard work my colleagues did to handle missing data. There was a huge, one thing about big data is it's big data no one's ever looked at. So when we got this data, there was vast tracts of nothingness in some of the data. It had been stored and tracked for years with no one ever looking at it, and some of it was blank. Some of it had temperatures that don't appear in this solar system. Some had notes home, get milk on the way home, in the middle of the data. Just all sorts of craziness, but there are ways you can handle that, and once those were worked through, you had a rich source of information that was predictive, even months in advance, about the health of the well. So, very useful. This is how we feel when you solve a hard problem like this. This is what we analysts think of ourselves. This is how we see ourselves, and I'm afraid this is how our clients often see us. Hey, I found some good data over here. Come here, guys. This is probably more close to reality, unfortunately. But still, anyway, we can have our myths. So in our hard work, we've done a lot of really fantastic problem solving, and we solved problems in lots of really interesting areas of fraud detection, biometrics, even stock market prediction. We had a hedge fund for a decade that worked really well, and the good news was the hedge fund was shut down as the edge disappeared and all the investors came out ahead. This is not the normal way hedge funds shut down, but the model was telling us when to get in, when to get out, including when the edge was disappearing. So product recommendation, credit scoring, insider threat prediction, all sorts of fancy, hard things. Over 90% technical success on some really hard problems. One of the problems we weren't able to solve was a horse race betting. So there's just too much of a house edge on that. But anyway, but only 2/3 of the solutions were implemented. So in our first decade, 1/3 of the projects would be successful, would work out of sample, would, as Cronin very wisely suggested, with scientific rigor, would be provably successful and then paid for and not used. So there's a terrible failure there somewhere along the way. How can we take more responsibility to see it all the way through? Because it's not a success if it's not used. And we have some responsibility for that. So in the second decade, in our last 15 significant projects, we've had 100% technical success, partly by being a little wiser about which projects we accept. And of those, all but one have been implemented. And one of the others is probably going to be implemented. It's ongoing. The one failure, the one that hasn't been implemented, the oil and gas one that I just explained to you, the one with $100 million in savings, has not been implemented. What is going on there? The one I highlighted to you is the one that hasn't been implemented. So, the phenomenal savings, it's just rescheduling people you already have going out there and doing the work. I mean, what is the holdup? Well, the oil and gas industry is a little strange. When they're making a lot of money, $100 million doesn't seem like much. And when they are not making money, it's all, everything's about survival, and even spending a few tens of thousands to change over a system is out of the question. So it's a very cyclical business, but still, this is emblematic of what's going on. And by the way, when things get back to somewhat normal, what's the excuse then? Why isn't it implemented? So what is going on? It still needs more study, how things can be pushed. How can you hand someone something that would save them and their shareholders that much money and have it just disappear and not be used? It's so simple. So, this is a continuing something worthy of great study, but don't believe that just because you've found the answer and you've proven it, it'll be used. We have to figure out what all the factors are, and we have to see it all the way through, and we have to figure it. So I'm going to share a couple of lessons we've learned, but again, I want to learn from you while I'm here too, if you have stories and if you have any lessons learned, how to see something all the way through. Sometimes you have ideal clients, and they take what you've got, receive it with joy, and run with it, but not always. Interesting. All right, so let's figure out what the keys are. Obviously, you need the technology to work, and you need clear thinking to use that technology correctly. Both of the two, the clear thinking is the harder. And then in the soft issues, the non-technological issues, you need trust. They need to know how to trust you and trust the models. And they have to be able to change what they're doing as a result. So a book that I find very useful on those soft issues is Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow. Daniel Kahneman's a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize in Economics for his writings on how people are irrational beings, and he's done all sorts of studies on how decisions are made. Fantastic writer, a wonderful human being, a very kind person, not an egotistical person, even though he's very highly decorated academic. A very fine fellow. And I highly recommend this book, well worth reading, in small doses because it's got a lot of content. And I wanted to highlight a couple of the points in there. First, the mental model of the brain can be thought of as having two systems. One, a fast, intuitive, unconscious system that we use 95% of the time, that just takes in information, easy to use. We assess people instantaneously, very visual, and it works astonishingly well, except when it doesn't. And then the second is the effortful and analytical and slow system that we have to be particularly good at as analysts, and it takes effort, and our pupils dilate when we use that system. So if I ask you 3 times 7, you can use system 1, or if you're looking at someone's face, or if you're hearing a loud noise, system 1's engaged, you orient, you analyze, and you don't even have to think about it. But if I ask you a 2-digit by 2-digit multiplication, even if you were engaged, you would have to pause, your eyes would dilate. You would, if you even bothered to try to answer it. I know some people walking along the hallway. There was a fellow I used to work with who would, if he was thinking, he would pause and his head would rest against the wall. He couldn't walk and think at the same time. And it turns out actually, if you walk faster than normal, that takes analytical effort. That's why I'm stupid on vacation. My wife is a very fast walker, and so to keep up with her, my brain is engaged, and it doesn't have room for analyzing anything like art, like art picture, that's about all I can handle. Anyway, but the intuitive system is easily fooled. We use it as much as possible, and we become exhausted if we use our analytical system too much. So we have to know when to engage it. We have to know when the intuitive system is going to be fooled. So let me show some examples of it being fooled, and even for experts. And some people might say, especially for experts, but one of the big differences between experts and amateurs, experts are often better than amateurs, not always. They're usually not worse than amateurs, except they're always more confident. And I'm very confident about that. Anyway, the recent study in the National Academy of Sciences looking at Israeli judges looking at parole, they take an average of about 6 minutes to review cases. They're reviewing cases all day long. It's hard work. They're trying to concentrate on this individual's case. And about a third of the cases are approved overall. But if you look at the approval rate over the day, this is what it looks like. It is not an even approval rate at all. Look at how astonishing this is. Do you know what those events are? This is lunch, right? So I'm glad I'm going now. You guys are still feeling pretty good. These are probably bathroom breaks here, but there's the feeding of the judges. If you ever want to go before a judge, go after lunch, right? Look at the approval rate jump up, and that has nothing to do with the case merits. Isn't that astonishing? Anchoring is another big effect. You've heard if a number is thrown out, we tend to work with that number rather than starting from scratch. An example is in Germany, judges again, I'm going to pick on judges a little bit, looking at shoplifting cases. So here's a shoplifter, and there's a German judge. I've lived in Germany, so this is what they look like. Anyway, and before they evaluate a case, looking at the merits, they have to look at a dice roll. It's part of the experiment, and the dice roll is either weighted to be a 3 or a 9. Now, they look at the dice roll, then they have to say whether the sentence is going to be more than that in months or less than that in months, and then they have to say what the sentence is, okay? When they see a 3, the sentence averages 5 months. When they see a 9, it averages 8 months. Now, when you look at that, you can calculate the effect size of the anchoring. The effect size is 50%. So half of that poor guy's sentence depended on that dice roll. These are expert judges that would be the last ones to think that it had any influence, that dice roll had any influence on them. Another effect, the last one, I'll talk about the halo effect. If something good or bad happens to you, it'll affect what you do next. What I'm showing there is an artifact from an ancient time in New York City. Some of you younger people may not recognize it. I can think of it as an isolation chamber with a tethered cell phone. So this is a phone booth in New York City, and someone goes in to make a call, and as they were coming out, the researcher spills their papers. Now, New York City, anybody here been to New York City? New York City, okay. What proportion of people coming out of that phone booth helped that poor sucker out? 0, that's a good guess, 0. The actual guess is 4%, and someone from New York said they weren't from around here. Yeah, so now a change in the experiment is made, and it's not a pretty girl that spills the papers, the color of the paper isn't changed, there's just a small change that's made, and now 88% of the random New Yorkers coming out of that phone booth are helping that poor guy out when he spills his papers. From 4% to 88%, and all that changed was a dime was left on the shelf for the phone booth. Somebody went in, they had the positive surprise of a free phone call, and now they're 22 times more likely to help somebody else a minute later when they step out of the phone booth. So when you go to the conference and you get these nice little squeeze toys and stuff, then you buy a $1,000 piece of software, you do a good job. No, sorry. Anyway, go to it. All right. So what will help as you're trying to deliver analytics to your organization? We help deliver something tangible rather than a model or something we deliver often a software tool, something that's that you can hold on to. You get the stakeholders involved early on, poking around and making suggestions, even if they're trivial, so that they have some ownership in it. Be humble, turn potential opponents into allies. Let me mention here, please go look up a little 2-minute clip on YouTube of the movie Amadeus. Actually, there's so many different versions of the 2-minute clip, but if you can see Tom Hulse playing Mozart there, and he is being welcomed by Salieri, the court musician, who's written a little welcome ditty, a little march for Mozart, and Mozart is committed it to memory, and he plays it back, and he says, but that doesn't really work, does it? What if you did this? And what if you did that? And it just humiliates Salieri by instantly improvising and improving on something that Salieri had spent, weeks preparing for him, because he's a genius, but he has no social skills, and he has no idea the implication of what he's just done. And I think, if you think about it, sometimes we data scientist types, we walk in and we listen to people for a few minutes and say, oh, well, you're doing it all wrong. And all you have to do is do it this way and change everything that you're doing. And it's like, that's not really going to be received very well. You have to do a lot of listening and find out what, certainly to have any idea what the real problem is, and then find a way to jointly improve the problem. So that's a great example of how not to come in as a consultant. Help folks walk before they run, get started with something measurable. Some people don't have if you can get something implemented within a few months that has a measurable change that's small, you'll have a much better opportunity to do something real over a longer period of time. Use the power of stories. A lot of times we are fighting stories. A story is a data point, and a model is built off of a whole collection of data points. A model is much more powerful than a story, but only in reality is it more powerful than a story, not to a human. To humans, stories have weight, and a model is just an equation. So fight stories with stories. Have the model find something in their data and get that story out. And arm your client to be a star. But instituting change is very hard. And Machiavelli had something to say about that in The Prince. There's nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. For the reformer has enemies in all those who would profit by the old order, and only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit by the new. This lukewarmness arising partly from the fear of their adversaries and partly from the incredulity of mankind, who do not truly believe in anything new until they have had actual experience of it. Man was a genius. So a medieval genius had pretty well figured this out about human nature. Well, if we look back at our ancestry here, we don't want to necessarily eat alone. We don't want to be beaten to death with rocks, right? But we want this new technology that we introduce can help the whole tribe out and in very positive ways. And so just some parting advice on how to do that done. It's not success if our work sits on a shelf. If we've done our part and it's up to somebody else, it's not a success. We need to do everything possible, and trust is a big part of that. How can we build the trust, and as well as build great models is a huge responsibility. We need to anticipate these enemies of change and not be surprised by them. Look for allies, and arm those allies. A beautiful chart or display or visualization goes a long way. If you have a group, one person being really good at visualization or PowerPoint is a good investment. And a beautiful chart will go all the way up. We've had stuff briefed in front of the President of the United States or appearing on the cover of an agency's report to Congress, things like that. You build a pretty enough chart, it will go all the way up the chain. So do that whenever possible. Think clearly. Thinking clearly is very tough. We're constantly, there's this tension because you have to brainstorm and think of crazy ideas, but then you always have to test them scientifically. So their ideas live in different stages, and knowing whether it's a crazy idea that hasn't been tested yet or one that's been fully vetted is very important. And you have to have the ability to hold that dichotomy. Follow the truth wherever it leads. You may find yourself alone, and that may be the right thing, to be alone. You will not succeed if you're alone. So if you want to succeed, bring allies somehow with you. And then learn to speak human. Talk the language of those around you. And don't give up. Hang in there. It's worth it. Thank you.